Welcome to the Happier Life Project, the official podcast from the award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. Hosted by broadcaster and journalist Gabby Sanderson.
Hello and welcome to the final episode of Season 5 of the Happier Life Project. I'm your host Gabby, and today we are wrapping up the current season with a topic that is often seen as a little bit taboo, but I think the conversation is getting more and more important and more into the mainstream. So here goes. Psychedelic-assisted therapy is one of the most talked about developments in mental health care today. After decades of stigma, researchers and clinicians are once again exploring whether certain psychedelic medicines could help people living with conditions such as depression, PTSD, anxiety, and addiction. Today's guest is Katy Collins, a licensed clinical social worker and clinical supervisor with specialist training in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, EMDR, somatic healing, and grief work. Through her professional work, Katy provides ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in regulated clinical settings. Katy has a deeply personal story about how plant medicines transformed her own mental health journey after spending nearly 3 decades on antidepressants. Together, we're going to explore both the science and Katy's personal experience today. We're going to discuss what the evidence is telling us, where the limitations lie, and what the future of this emerging field may look like. Now, before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This episode is for educational and informational purposes only. We are discussing current research and clinical practice surrounding psychedelic-assisted therapy, but we are not encouraging anyone to use illegal substances or to pursue any form of treatment outside of appropriate medical care. Nothing in this conversation should be taken as medical advice. If you have any questions or concerns about your mental or physical health, or you're considering any form of treatment, please speak to your GP or a qualified healthcare professional. And now we've got our disclaimer out of the way. Katy Collins, welcome to the Happier Life Project.
Hi, Gabby. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. You are closing Series 5. This is our final show before we take a break for the summer. And we're going out on a bit of a taboo subject, I suppose, when we're talking about mental health. But as I already mentioned in the intro, we can't ignore it. It's just becoming more and more part of the conversation. So for anybody new to this particular subject, Katy, I'd love to hear in your own words, what exactly is psychedelic-assisted therapy?
You know, I think the general definition is using medicines to help expand the mind in a way that traditional talk therapy can't do, because psychedelic-assisted therapy or plant medicines, they both reach a different part of the brain that is inaccessible by just talk therapy. So, you know, using mind-altering experiences to help reach these part of the brains that typically operate under the subconscious, as opposed to the prefrontal cortex, which is the memory processing and decision-making part of our brain.
Well, before we get a bit more into that, I think I have to kind of address the thing that many people will be thinking. These drugs that we're talking about are ones that, okay, yes, they might be being talked about in terms of like helping somebody with mental health issues, but they're also used to partay. And so how can they do both?
Right. And I think, that's a very important distinction, because I think that's one of the main reasons why people are, either against it or just completely shut off the possibility that it is a medicine and can help. And so, I think the distinction lies in drugs versus medicine. Partying, yes, that is more of a drug-induced effect, because you are using the same substance to go outside of your body. You are leaving it to, dissociate, disconnect, to forget whatever's going on in your life. And that's when it is classified as a drug substance. Right. When we are doing psychedelic-assisted therapy, we are talking about the medicinal properties of the exact same product. The intention is different. The intention with the medicine journey is to go inward, to heal trauma, to go into those spaces that actually drop you into yourself instead of trying to escape. So there's a very big difference in a drug versus the medicinal property.
I can understand how, if somebody's taking it at, say, a party and then mixing it with alcohol, why it would be a completely different experience. But I suppose I'm trying to get my head around the fact of somebody because I know people that prefer to take these drugs recreationally rather than drink alcohol when they go out to party. So I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around how can they be doing that, but it's the same thing that's being treated for, say, chronic depression or PTSD, but the people that are taking them for partying purposes aren't necessarily healing old wounds or traumas or mental health conditions. So do you have any kind of explanation as to why it's being used in two different ways, I suppose, and there's two different outcomes? It sounds like it's about setting.
Yes, it's about setting. I think what you're asking is, these medicines or drugs create an expansiveness. So if you are in a party setting, if you are watching music, if you're, doing whatever you're doing at a party, it does create this elevation and expansiveness. And, because it's hitting your serotonin and dopamine receptors. In either setting, it's still attaching to those receptors. And so, in the situation where it's more of a party atmosphere, you're still getting the effects of the elevated experience and possibly hallucinations, which people like in a party setting sometimes. But the goal there is to, like I said just a second ago, is to come out of your current reality, come out of your current state. It is focusing on the partying atmosphere. In the traditional psychedelic-assisted therapy, you're having the same effects where it's attaching to the serotonin and the dopamine. It's increasing those chemicals to make you feel better. But the setting is in a place where you're actually being guided through therapy, which is also the important distinguishing factor in this, by a therapist that can help you go into those places where your shadow side exists, or where these traumas happened that you can't necessarily experience just by talking. But that's the important part of this, is therapy combined with the medicine is what creates a really big distinction. It's not the psilocybin or the MDMA or the ketamine alone that produces the healing effect. It's the combination of the therapy alongside the psychedelics.
And I'd imagine if you're working with a professional, then the amount that you're taking is highly controlled versus at a party where, roll the dice people, basically, right?
Yes, correct. Absolutely. Yes. And typically, with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and psilocybin, the doses are much higher because we are trying to get the brain into the state of where we have access to the neuroplasticity, where we can begin recreating these old stories and these old messages and having these new neurotransmitters connect in a different way. And that is done at the higher dosage. Yes.
So why do you think there's this turning point now? Because that's what it feels like. The conversation, I'd like us to start with ketamine first, because that is legalised in the UK, in Portugal, where you are. Obviously, that's what you do as part of your career. So I'd like to sort of touch on that first. But before we get into that, just in general, I mean, some of the studies that I've been looking at, which we'll get into a bit later on as well, like you can't ignore the incredible results. So I do feel like we're potentially on this cusp where maybe down the line, more of these plant-based medicines might become legalized. But why now do you think that this is suddenly coming back into the conversation?
Persistence, really, like people that really and truly believe in plant medicine have just kept going and going and going. And, behind the scenes, it hasn't stopped. People have still been conducting research. People have still been working with these medicines where there's treatment-resistant depression, where there's high anxiety, where there's PTSD. Just because it hasn't been publicized or there hasn't been like public knowledge of it, research has been going on since the 1970s where, the prohibition of psychedelics kind of started. And so, it's just with the persistence. And when people believe in something and continue to go after it, you continue to find these really incredible possibilities that can come from these type of medicines.
Yeah, I've been watching some documentaries on this stuff recently in preparation, and there's a type of depression where there was one study that I watched where they aren't respondent to antidepressants. I forget the term that was used.
Treatment resistant?
Yes, thank you. Treatment resistant, exactly, depression. Where you put them on some of this other stuff that we're talking about today, and quite frankly, the results are absolutely life-changing. And then I couldn't help but feel sad that they weren't able to access in the future should they need further dosage of the psilocybin one in particular that I was looking at, where, it was really changing somebody's life for the better. But it was in a study where they wouldn't be able to access that again, certainly legally and with a therapist. And so it felt a bit bittersweet.
Sure. And that's kind of the yo-yo that we're on. It's 2 steps forwards. We see improvement. We see people benefiting from it. And then, the door shuts because of, all of the background reasons, whether it's, government, wanting to keep a handle on it or control on it. It's kind of a taboo place to go as well. But, I think there's a level of control that is still trying to be maintained. And in that, as we move forward, all of these doors are opening, and then there's this fear-based that comes in, and it's like, nope, never mind, we're going to shut that door. But that's where the persistence comes in, where people are like, okay, you can shut that door, but we're going to go around this side, and we're going to go through the back door and try it. And that's how we are where we are. And I think that's going to be the trend continuing, because there's no doubt the power of these medicines. And we just have to go around all the blocks that keep getting put up. That's really what makes it even more powerful, I think, is, people really being dedicated to this healing process.
So interesting. Well, today we're going to focus, I think, mainly on ketamine and psilocybin, but there is also other big ones such as MDMA and LSD and ayahuasca, and we might touch on that a little bit because I think that's part of your personal story as well, which is extremely... Well, we'll save it. We'll get there. But let's move on to your professional work for the moment. And we can look at ketamine a little bit more through the microscope, I suppose, when it comes to treating people who are very poorly with mental illness. I don't know if you could share any, should we say case studies, or just like a more generalized client that you would work with typically, and how they might present when they come to see you, how the drug works, and then the benefits that you see afterwards.
Sure. I think it's important to kind of start with, too, my specialization is in grief and trauma. And so in that, my goal has been to find the most effective way to heal trauma because of my own personal experience of carrying lots of trauma and nothing working. Medication, talk therapy, all of these different modalities that I use to help treat myself. And so then I find myself doing the same thing to help others. And trauma is tricky because it is also persistent. So how I came about using ketamine therapy in my career was I had been working with EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a very standard trauma therapy because it goes into the same neural network of getting into the subconscious to help with the processing of stored and stuck emotions. And really, that's what trauma is. It's stored emotions that have not been fully processed because of the way that the brain fragments the situation when a trauma happens. It fragments all the different parts of it. And so that unprocessed emotional part is what creates the trauma. And so the trick to healing it is to get into that place where the trauma is stored to complete the emotional processing piece of it. And so with EMDR, it goes into that and it helps to bring the emotion with the event to complete the emotional processing and therefore creating a whole new emotional experience with the traumatic memory. Okay. So that being said, I had been doing that for years and I was working with a couple of clients and one that was suicidal every single time. We had been working together for a couple of years weekly and they were suicidal and we had been doing EMDR and it just wasn't getting there. And they actually was like, I give up, I'm doing ketamine therapy. And there was some resistance there because of this fear of it being addictive as a drug instead of a medicine. And so we had gone back and forth of, the medicinal properties. I hadn't really done much with ketamine therapy at that point in time. I had heard of it, but I wasn't aware of the benefits of it completely. And in a moment of despair, because we had been doing EMDR for 2 years, every week, once a week, this patient went and did ketamine therapy. And after one session, all suicidal ideation went away. One session of ketamine therapy. That was the infusion alongside the therapeutic part of it. Did it come back? Yes, it kind of surfaced, but it wasn't ever at the extent where it was whenever they first began therapy with me. And then after, a succession of 6 sessions of ketamine therapy, all of the suicidal ideation was gone. And so with that, I was like, I am in. This is where I want to go because it was this modality that touched on a very, very severe case of suicidal ideation every single day of this person's life.
Wow. I've heard that there is actually 2 different ways of ketamine-assisted therapy, like it being distributed the IV way that you referred to, and then there's these like nasal sprays as well. But either way, you've got to be with a licensed professional who administers the drug.
Correct. There's actually 4 different ways of ketamine.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yep. So you can have the IV, which is intravenously through your veins. You have IM, which is intramuscular, and that's just a shot. So the IV is a continuous flow of the medication. It's much more controlled. So people with heart problems or just are kind of scared in general, there's more control over the IV administration. The IM is one shot and you're in for the ride. And then there is the Spravato, which you're talking about, the nasal, and that's a much lesser dose. You don't go necessarily into a full journey as you do with the IM and the IV. And then there are the lozenges, which I don't know if you've seen, like the Mind Bloom. We have that here in America where you can do at home ketamine treatment with the lozenges, which is a drastically lower effect or dosage than the Spravato, the nasal, or the IM and IV.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when we talk about ketamine, I can't help but think about like my summers in Ibiza. You'd see people in clubs, going down this K-hole and we'd say, oh, they're on regretamine. It was very like, and you'd just be like, dear Jesus, I never ever want to look like that person drooling in the corner kind of thing. Again, this is why I think people need to do this. If you're going to do this properly with professionals. Right.
Sure.
But also to me, because of that exposure, I suppose, if I was in a situation with my mental health and it was really bad, and, you know, maybe it was something that I should try or would like to try, I'd be quite scared because I'd be frightened of being on this trip and maybe not being able to get myself out of it, or maybe it being like the longest 6 hours of my life. What do you have to say in response to that?
That is valid. That is a very valid fear. And I think that's one of the things that keep people from stepping into this type of work because of what is portrayed on the media of, you know, being in a K-hole. Yes, not a pretty sight, you know? And so, no one wants to look like that. But that's, again, you know, set and setting. That's not really what people look like when they're doing a ketamine journey in my office. No one has ever been sitting in a corner drooling, you know, while we've been doing therapy together. But there is that fear of the loss of control and what happens if I don't come back. Because again, I think, you know, during this phase of like prohibition, and was it the Reagan administration, I think in the 80s, just say no to drugs. Really,
the war on drugs.
Nancy Reagan, just say no. Like that whole movement, like really dramatized the effects of these substances as a method to scare people. And it worked. But also it can be scary if you're not using it in a medicinal way. And so it is all about set and setting. But yes, very valid fear of not knowing what to expect, feeling out of control, just not knowing exactly how the outcome is going to be. For ketamine, it is about a 45-minute journey, which is one of the distinguishing factors in that versus psilocybin versus MDMA. So ketamine is, I think, what makes it, you know, more digestible, if you will, is that it's such a shorter journey compared to the other psychedelics. And so, you know, that's a little bit more reassuring to people. But, you know, the people that I see, Gabby, are the people that are desperate. And so at that point, the desperation overrides the fear.
Yeah, that's fair. Do you take people then, once they're, let's say, under the influence, do you take them to the trauma? I imagine sometimes people don't know why they feel so terrible. Like I did see that on, I think it was one of the Netflix documentaries that I watched. There was one guy that was particularly clinically depressed and had been for many years, and he didn't know exactly why. They'd not been able to like actually get to the trauma. But just generally, like, do you just kind of let people go on the journey, or do you kind of steer them on that journey to where they need to go to meet whatever's going on?
No, it's never done willy-nilly. The preparation is the most important part of this type of therapy. So
what does that look like?
So a traditional ketamine-assisted session, very different than going to a ketamine clinic, which is what we have those in Houston or in the United States as well. A ketamine clinic, you just go in and you have your infusion and you leave. It's, you know, an hour session. There's no prep. There's no integration at the end. And it gets the ketamine in your system, but you don't get the therapeutic part of it. With a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, it's a 3-hour session. And the first part is the preparation. It's the intention setting. And that is where we discuss what's coming up, even if there's not any related memories to the emotions that this person has been feeling, like you just asked. You know, we focus on the feeling. We focus on where it is in the body. We focus on the intention of going into the medicine journey, because even though you can't necessarily control what's coming up in the journey, just by having that intention, it's processing in your brain. And so it's attaching to the places of your brain that need that attention of like, hey, we're ready to work on this. You know, it's like, kind of like asking permission from your brain to open that door to allow access to the piece that's going to heal that. And so, you know, we discuss safety. We discuss what happens if I get scared. We discuss what happens if something does go awry, which fingers crossed, never happens. It hasn't yet. In my years of practicing, we've never had a negative experience where something detrimental has happened ever. So it's a very safe medicine. But the preparation is essential, as well as the integration afterwards. And that's what makes it so unique in comparison to using it as a party drug or just any other talk therapy. It's very, very carefully structured to include the therapeutic part, because the medicine isn't what's healing you. The medicine is creating the open door to the neural pathways to help you heal. But in order to get there, you've got to have the therapeutic aspect and value to it.
How long do effects usually last then after somebody's gone through the treatment? Like, how many dosage does somebody particularly need?
For ketamine, scientifically, it's been proven that 6 sessions change the default network. The default network is the way that our brain has internalized specific traumas. And so that's where it's been scientifically proven that that default network does shift after 6 sessions. And so, that's how we do our grouping is when you sign up for a ketamine-assisted therapy, then you're doing 6 sessions. From there, it just depends. It's very individualized. It depends on how deep that person wants to go. It depends what kind of feeling they want to have. Some people are like, and I'm done. That was intense. And I don't want to do any more ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Thank you very much. I got what I needed. My anxiety has reduced. I'm not having ruminating thoughts about my trauma. I'm able to sleep well at night, and that's all I need. Other people want to go really deep, and so they will continue with booster sessions, which could be, a session once a month or whatever the doctor and the client decide works best for them. So it really just depends how deep each individual wants to go on how many sessions that they want to do. But clinically speaking, scientifically speaking, 6 sessions is where the change happens. Lasting change happens.
Right. So that's for things like depression, PTSD, anxiety. Mm-hmm. Are there any other, like addiction? Is that right? Does it help with somebody that's got addiction problems?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Really, I think plant medicines can help with anything that your intention is set for it to help, because it's all about intentionality, because you're building the intention, you are directing your brain to heal these different parts. And ketamine therapy has helped people stop drinking. And people think that that's crazy that ketamine would help do that. But it's because in that state of flexibility within your brain, the neuroplasticity, you can transform those neural pathways to really, change anything. So yes, addiction, PTSD, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. That's another anxiety-driven disorder that it also helps.
Is there anybody that shouldn't do ketamine-assisted therapy? Like, are there any health conditions that you should steer clear of?
Yeah, and one of the things that you have to be really careful with and rule out is like bipolar manic episodes or bipolar disorder in current mania. You have to really be careful with that because of the way that the ketamine attaches to the serotonin. It gives you more. And so mania can really kind of spiral out of control with that. So yeah, there are different things that we're looking for and, that do prohibit you from being able to participate. So it's a very careful ruling out of things just to make sure that medically you're safe too. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Gosh, we've been talking for almost half an hour and we've not even gotten into your fantastic story yet, which is so fascinating. So I think we should move on to this part of the conversation. If we start at you age 16, when you were put on antidepressants for how many years?
Gosh, well, I'll be 50 in September, and I've been off of antidepressants for about 5 years without relapsing or, having to feel like I need to go back. But yeah, I started at age 16 for major depressive disorder, high levels of anxiety, and very little resources. Back then, that was, in the 90s, even at that point in time, therapy was still kind of stigmatized, and so even asking for help at that point in time, really, just out of not being able to completely function, something had to be done. So yeah, I started on Prozac when I was 16. And it's been a journey of taking Prozac, wanting to get off, taking Prozac, wanting to get off. And so this yo-yo of feeling like I've healed enough to not have to take medicine, and then inevitably being triggered back into a depressive episode in which I had to take medication again. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. And plant medicines are actually what enabled me to not have to go back on antidepressants for 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
So that's, I've never been good at maths, but we're talking about 24 years, 24-ish years.
Sure, yeah.
On antidepressants and doing the yo-yo. And many people listening and myself can relate to that whole, I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling steady, I'm going to start to wean, and then something happens and you're like back to square one, and you just feel mad at yourself because, it's really, really hard to come off any kind of antidepressant. I don't need to tell you that. So in that case then, if you wouldn't mind sharing, like, what happened for you with plant medicine, like what plant medicine, and how did it get you off?
Yeah. So in 2020, I went through a really, really nasty divorce. And I was on 80 milligrams of Prozac, which is the highest dose, and still not feeling relief because it was just it was incredibly hard part of my life. I was seeing a therapist.
Not to mention COVID. That's what the pandemic hit as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I was seeing a therapist doing EMDR, and she said, Katy, I really think you need to go and see this lady who does ayahuasca ceremonies. And going back to my childhood, for some reason, I had always been have this deep fascination with psychedelics. And I'd always, even as, a teenager, and just always really curious and interested in them. And I didn't really know why. But fast forward, to this, my therapist saying, I would like for you to go and talk to this lady about doing ayahuasca. At that point, like my clients, I was like, anything. I will do anything, because I was to the point where, again, not functioning. I'm a mom, I have a child, and I'm going through this divorce, and I'm trying to work, and I'm trying to do all of these things just to keep my head above water. And the Prozac was not working at the highest dose. In order to prepare for the ayahuasca, you have to come off all antidepressants, which I think is one of the blocks to people having full access, which makes ketamine and psilocybin a little bit more of an accessible medicine, because you don't necessarily have to fully come off antidepressants to start using those medicines. But with ayahuasca, you did. And I was so determined that I just white knuckled it. Not recommended, by the way, let me just say, not recommended unless you're under medical supervision to just get off antidepressants to begin doing these medicines. It can be very dangerous. And it was very challenging. But I was so determined to do it with the help of my therapist and my doctor. I was able to wean off of my Prozac and get into ayahuasca. And ayahuasca is 6 to 8 hour journey. And at the end of that, I had relief. I was able to breathe again. I was able to at least have a sense of hope that my life wasn't actually going down the drain completely, and that I was going to be able to take care of myself, and I was going to be able to take care of my son, and I was going to be able to work, and all the things that really kind of were on a rocky road at that point in time. But just my one session of ayahuasca shifted that, and I haven't been on antidepressants since then. But that didn't stop the work. I continued the work from that point on. So again, it's not just the medicine, it's the work that you do in combination with the medicine. So the medicine got me off the antidepressants, but I was still doing therapy once a week. I was still doing EMDR. I was still, using my community support. So that's just a piece of the puzzle. The other puzzle still is therapeutic and still working on what created the need for antidepressants in the first place.
I've got a few friends that have done the ayahuasca journey, and they all speak very positively about the experience. But from what I could gather, and also from what I've heard when other people have shared their story on other podcasts, it doesn't tend to last. maybe it's because they're not continuing the therapy afterwards. Maybe that's it. I think it's, from what I can gather, it's almost been like, I don't want to say a holiday, but maybe like you go and do a yoga retreat or something. Then there's this like, go and do this ayahuasca thing. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm fascinated, but I'm also a little bit skeptical.
Sure.
Just because I'm like, what have you learnt though? Is it, oh yeah, it was amazing and stuff, but yeah, like I said, it doesn't seem to have stick.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head. It's not sticking because they're not doing the rest of the work to make it stick. You can have an incredible ayahuasca experience, but that doesn't mean that it's going to continue if you don't continue the process yourself. It is solely, up to you to continue to do the healing work. It's like, if you break an arm and you don't do the physical therapy afterwards, it's going to heal, but it's not going to heal properly. And there's going to be continued aches and pains because you didn't do the physical therapy to help heal the arm. So it's, the difference in putting a Band-Aid on something and putting a Band-Aid on, taking it off, scrubbing the wound, getting it completely clean so it can heal properly.
Okay. Is the experience very different to the ketamine one then?
Yes. Ayahuasca versus ketamine? Yes, very different. Very, very different. First and foremost is the length of the journey. Ketamine, 45 minutes, hour max. And, after an hour, you're back to your normal self. You may feel a little bit kind of heavy because of the anesthesia part of the medicine, but you can go about your daily activities for the most part after a ketamine journey. Ayahuasca is 6 to 8 hours. And the next day, because of the serotonin uptake, you do feel a little bit more energized, but the journey itself lasts much longer, and the recovery, you're tired. It takes a lot out of your body physically from doing the ayahuasca journey. Okay. I mean, each journey is very different too. Just by the experience in the medicine is different.
Well, could we move on then now to mushrooms and psilocybin? Yes. Because there seems to be an enormous amount of public interest at the moment. I've got this in my notes about a recent case study. It was published in Frontiers in Neuroscience, and this is in regards to dementia research. You probably caught the story as well. I think it went global. This story involves an 80-year-old woman with advanced dementia. So she received her diagnosis 10 years prior. At the beginning of the recent intervention, her condition was very advanced. She was incontinent, could only speak in single syllables, and couldn't dress herself. Walking and eating both required assistance, and she was emotionally unresponsive. With the consent of her legal guardians, the lady was enrolled in a psilocybin trial in Brazil. Shortly after receiving the dose, the patient appeared to be overheating. She also entered a prolonged sleep-like state. Then, as the report authors, approximately 19 hours after administration, the patient spontaneously initiated autobiographical conversation lasting several hours. In the following weeks, the patient stopped being incontinent, even during the night, could move, eat more easily, and became much better at social interactions. Just days after the psilocybin intervention, she could walk unaided and dress herself. The benefits of this intervention persisted, so the researchers decided to continue the treatment. 1 month after the initial intervention, the woman received a second, slightly smaller dosage. During this session, she was verbally expressive throughout and described emotionally positive imagery involving surfing with her son on a peaceful island. The authors also noted that she used more facial expressions and humour and demonstrated emotional reciprocity. Emotional reciprocity. Reciprocity. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Maybe I need some of this. She was also markedly better at walking unaided. That's incredible, right?
Incredible. Yes. And that's one of the more incredible stories, which I'm so happy that they're, talking about this, because that's what all of these medicines do. They increase the flexibility in your brain networking, which opens these pathways to updated and new learning. And essentially that's what I'm hearing happen to her, just in a very dramatic way, but it's the same thing that happens with mental health. It opens these doors of neuroplasticity where your brain can relearn what it has, pushed away, what it has not been able to learn because of the flexibility that these medicines target in the brain.
I mean, talk about improving your quality of life. I just want to share one more study, and this is about psilocybin and relief from depressive symptoms. This was the first randomised double-blind study in Sweden of psilocybin for depression. The effects persisted for over 3 months, according to researchers at Karolinska Institute. A total of 35 people aged 20 to 65 with moderate to severe recurrent depression took part. Participants were randomly assigned to receive either a single dose of 25 milligrams of psilocybin or an active placebo in the form of niacin, a vitamin that causes a noticeable physical reaction. Both groups received psychotherapeutic support on 5 occasions before, during and after treatment. On the day of dosing, participants were asked to lie down and focus inwardly while wearing an eye mask and listening to music via headphones. After 6 weeks, 53% of participants in the psilocybin group were in remission, compared with 6% in the placebo group. After 1 year, the same proportion of the psilocybin group remained in remission, but by then no confirmed difference between the groups was observed, as many of those who had received the placebo had also recovered. So again, we're not encouraging anyone to seek anything illegal, but you can't ignore these results, can you, Katy?
Correct. Right. Yes. Yeah, no, you can't. The more persistent people are and continue to do these studies, the more, information we have. But it's life-changing. It is life-changing. And it's changed my life, and I wouldn't be sitting here today if it didn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
A more gentler way of exploring this stuff seems to be in microdosing as well. Do you have anything to add in terms of the microdosing conversation? For the psilocybin, I believe it's used to help with things like focus. People are saying they feel more focused and able to get through their work, or that they're procrastinating less, maybe feeling a bit more creative. Yeah. So microdosing, I think, is, a very interesting aspect of it, and also a confusing aspect for people who don't understand psilocybin and the wide array of effects that it can have and benefits. So microdosing is a very, very small dose of psilocybin. So small that you don't even recognize, you don't feel it. It has 0 effects on you visually. So you don't have hallucinations. You just have the uptick and, like you said, energy, concentration, focus, mental clarity. I know perimenopause is a thing, and it really helps with the symptoms of perimenopause too. So it's not just mental health. It does help with, taking correct. I know, taking a microdose, and there's a regimen too. Paul Stamets is kind of the godfather of psilocybin, and he's written many books on psilocybin and microdosing, and there are very specific ways of taking the microdose. So it's not a daily regimen, but there's different psilocybin stacks, they're called, that really help to target these things. But it's at a minimal dose, so you can go about your daily life, but you still feel the effects of the lift in mood, the brain clarity, all the things that we just talked about. Yeah, Paul, actually, just going back to him, I'd put in my notes when he was, I'd say at the beginning of his journey, exploring all of this stuff, said that he took a hero's dose of psilocybin, the active ingredient in mushrooms as well, for anybody that doesn't know what we're talking about. But it removed his stutter, he claims.
Yes. And actually, I was just on an Antarctica cruise with Paul Stamets and Rick Doblin, the MDMA. We went to Antarctica together for a summit last November. And he told us this story, too, in his beginning days of psilocybin, that his mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 4 breast cancer. And I don't believe it was psilocybin, but it was through medicinal mushrooms that he was able to prolong her life when she was given, I think it was like 8 months to live with, because she was stage 4, and through the use just of mushrooms in general. And so, psilocybin and other mushrooms, I mean, it's just a miraculous part of nature that we're just discovering the full effects of them.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Mm-hmm. And these have been used for centuries, haven't they, in indigenous thank you, indigenous traditions. So why do you think Western culture sometimes misunderstands these medicines? Is it to do with the big greedy pharmaceutical companies? Because I can't help think this plays a big factor.
Yes, it's controversial, but I think, it's control. Governmental control, pharmaceutical control. I think that there, especially in America, Big Pharma wants to be in control. And if you were able to get off antidepressants, then they would be left without money and without control. And so, I think there's, the discriminatory nature of cultures, the culture war that exists. We're like, well, they do that and that's weird and we don't do that, so we're better, or all of that. But also, the governmental piece and FDA and pharmaceutical companies. I think it's all, my opinion, maintaining control in many, because there are so many research studies that prove the opposite of what they're trying to claim, that pharmaceuticals are the only way.
Do you have any concerns about the growing underground movement? And I think because it's not legalized.
Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily have concern about the underground movement. What I do have concern about is Trump, America, all of a sudden with Ibogaine putting his stamp of approval on it. So that actually concerns me more than the underground, because they're taking these indigenous medicines and taking these very sacred medicines and now saying, okay, now we're going to approve them, and now there's more people involved that take away the ceremonial effect of it. And so that concerns me more than keeping to the traditional sense and maintaining the sacredness of the medicines.
Do you think psychedelic-assisted therapy will become a mainstream part of mental health care during our lifetime?
My hope is that it does. I mean, it seems the stigma is decreasing. And so my hope is that the more people are, learning about it and becoming more open to the idea of the possibility that this can help people, and continue to see these studies like the lady who all of a sudden talked. And, all of these studies are just so incredibly powerful that you can't ignore them. So that's my hope. I think it'll be a slow process, but I do think with persistence and people that are willing to push the limit and speak out and have a voice and do it despite possible repercussions, that we will get there. Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic way to conclude today's episode. Thank you so much, Katy. You've been an absolute wealth of information. If people are curious to learn a bit more or to reach out to you, should I share your website?
Sure, yeah, you can share my website. Sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's sagehealinghouston.com. We'll put the links in the episode show notes as well. And you're also on Instagram under the same name, Sage Healing Houston.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Gabby. It was a pleasure. And I am available for anyone who has additional questions. It's my passion. It's what I do. It's saved my life. It's saved many others' lives. And I'm so happy to be asked to share my experience with it. So thank you.
Hello friends, it's Gabby back with you. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download. You can access all of the content, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you found this episode helpful, please do subscribe and leave a review and share it with your friends. And to find and follow us on social media, we are most active on Instagram, and you can find us at My Possible Self. And I've been at Radio Gabby. Until the next one, do take care. Bye for now.